Hello and welcome to my review of 2001, A Space Odyssey by Arthur C Clarke. Yes, Arthur C Clarke, because I am reviewing the book and not the film. Now, the internet would not be the internet without a sizable percentage of it being devoted to the film based on and inspiring this book, and that apparent contradiction stems from the fact that both book and film are being developed in a somewhat symbiotic and very nearly parallel state. However, if I didn't know that and somebody told me that they were making a film based on the book, I would probably have laughed because it seems almost unfilmable. At the very least, the plot is full of little things that would appear on a list of do-nots when it comes to writing stories. Though it splits into 8 sections, 6 of which are numbered and 2 are not, 2001 is basically 4 acts. The first, the prologue, follows a tribe of proto-humans or ape men and their encounter with an extraterrestrial monolith. There is no dialogue here, there's no explanation that doesn't come from the narrator. That this probe is not the catalyst for change, as you'll find people suggesting from watching the movie, but the agent of change is actually unclear if you haven't read the book. But basically, the probe rewrites the apes on an atomic level to change their development. The very atoms of his simple brain were being twisted into new patterns. If he survived, those patterns would become eternal, for his genes would pass them on to future generations. The plot then jumps forward 3 million years, and the second act follows Dr. Hayward Floyd as he travels to the moon, where another monolith has been discovered. This monolith, on contact with the sun, sends out a message into the stars aimed towards Saturn. Any prediction from this that Dr. Floyd would be our hero, however, is proven wrong in that he only fleetingly reappears in the book after this point. And Act 3 follows the spaceship Discovery as it heads out to Saturn using Jupiter's gravity as a slingshot. While on their journey, the shipboard computer malfunctions and things here get very tense and quite violent. The final act sees Dr. Bowman reaching Saturn, passing through a stargate, visiting strange new worlds, and boldly going where no man has gone before. Arthur C Clarke is very much in the Heinlein mould, and there is clearly some love for his labour as he describes the planets they encounter, some of the science and maths that gets the Discovery out that far. In fact, 2001 is comparable to peak Heinlein, moving with a brisk pace and energy through the first 3 acts that is only occasionally held up by Clarke's passion for the science and the stars, which in truth is so obvious that it's actually hard to describe as a bad thing, even when it does occasionally delay proceedings. The final act, Bowman's trip through the Stargate and beyond, is the most prominent example of this. Elsewhere, the plot holds the attention better, and the third section, and particularly Bowman's eerie back and forths with the Howl, the ship's computer, are incredible. The book tingles the spine through this section, as well as some of the better horror books I've read, especially when the chilling threat of Howl's silence is scarier than the ship's precious air roaring out of the open airlock. From the final paragraphs of these chapters on screen, you can really see how Clarke escalates the tension and the danger very rapidly. If I had 2 minor criticisms of this section, it'd be that 1, it wasn't longer, and 2, that Hal deserved a more fitting struggle for his final moments. Imagine if this was the point where the airlock was opened, that Bowman's fight was accomplished against a ticking time limit. That said, if the whole book was as good overall as this section is as it stands, it would be an extraordinary achievement. However, the second and the fourth section lack that same verve despite the obvious research and skill invested in them, or perhaps because of it, because sometimes it's better to just move things along, and Floyd's departure from Earth, his layover at the space station, and then his transfer onto the moon is at least 1 stop too far. The red herring subplot of an outbreak of an unspecified disease on the moon isn't developed enough to be worth including, really, though if it was, the search for the truth might have actually made a decent novel by itself. The final section is remarkable for the details of the new worlds that Clarke creates, but probably a little bit too long a section to have your protagonist passively observing something that is only marginally connected to the plot and its themes. Whether Floyd or Bowman are the lead characters of the particular section of the book is largely irrelevant. Neither makes for a particularly interesting character. In fact, Moonwatcher the Ape Man is more interesting and nuanced than either, but regardless, Bowman has enough going for him to make you root for him in his struggles against Hal. The significance of the strength or weakness of the protagonist is lessened somewhat because, as with peak Heinlein, this is a novel about all of mankind, and this passage is about as Heinlein as anything I've seen from another author. Well, another author not named Darwin, anyway. When Earth was tamed and tranquil and perhaps a little tired, there would still be the scope for those who love freedom, for the tough pioneers, the restless adventurers, but their tools would not be the axe and gun and canoe and wagon. They would be nuclear power plant and plasma drive and hydroponic farm. The time was fast approaching when Earth, like all mothers, must say farewell to her children. And as with the first encounter with the Monolith, the first tentative steps of the ape-men towards mankind is born from violence, and the freshly armed Moonwatcher's violent dispatching of his rival. So Clarke characterises all of evolution as struggle, fundamentally won by the strong, and he ties that with weaponry that now, far developed from club and spear, is actually threatening mankind's survival. Without those weapons, often though he had used them against himself, man would never have conquered his world. Into them he had poured his heart and soul, and for ages they had served him well. But now, as long as they existed, he was living on borrowed time. So man stands on the precipice and the promontory, a key moment in its development, to pool resources in a new world, as we see on the space station, where the difference between rivals Russia and America is purely nominal and administrative, where Dr. Floyd's best friend is the Russian Dmitri, or to embrace the animosity of old and mutually assured destruction. At this moment, the second monolith is discovered and signals its maker of our progress, with Bowman then sent out into the distant solar system to investigate. After 10,000 years, man had at last found something as exciting as war. Unfortunately, not all nations had yet realised that fact. The inevitable progress of mankind, the first steps of which are already observed, would eventually lead to the augmentation of the flesh with technology, with the scientists of Earth musing that once that process begins, its inevitable end is the eradication of the fragile flesh, the movement of the mind to a purely synthetic body, and then the shedding of even that, the eventual evolution of the mind beyond matter to the pure spirit. And Clarke tells us, if there is anything beyond that, its name could only be God. The theoretical model, though, we learn, is the development the monolith's makers had followed. First their brain and then their thoughts alone they transferred into shining new homes of metal and plastic. In these they roamed the stars. They no longer built spaceships, they were spaceships. And onward, of course. One issue not explored by Clarke, though, which I found quite interesting, is the position of Hal in this. The artificial mind inhabits and runs the ship Discovery until its conflict with the less advanced organic in the form of Bowman anyway. Perhaps Hal, with his superior intellect, is an artificial step on the evolution ladder and an attempt to shortcut the process. If not, Bowman's encounter with the makers could have gone a very different way, because these are beings that are not concerned with races still struggling up from savagery. They would be interested in our civilization only if we proved our fitness to survive by crossing space and escaping our cradle. Yet Bowman's victory over Hal could be seen as a moment of savagery, a step back in progress. But perhaps it also shows our fitness to survive, because when Bowman steps out into the hotel room created by the makers from images from a TV show, they deem him worthy of survival, of evolution, and he becomes one like them, able to travel the universe instantly. Now, the finale of the novel, some 3 or 4 chapters that were not filmed at all by Kubrick and co, show our world ended in a nuclear apocalypse, then re-evolves to repeat the process via the discovery of a slightly more complicated monolith discovered on the moon, and then another encounter between an advanced people whose own civilization is dying and early ape men. This final section, with its return almost to the position it was in at the beginning, proposes that there's an evolution destruction cycle that is inevitable, yet it is in our nature to struggle against it anyway, to try and break it, because like our makers who seed hundreds of similar worlds in the hope of finding their equals, we are designed in their image to try and try again until we succeed. It's a powerful idea, the ideas of which are sown as early as the end of the first Moonwatcher section. The tribe grew into a village, the village into a town, speech became eternal. Presently he, that's mankind, invented philosophy and religion, and he peopled the sky, not altogether inaccurately, with gods. 2001 represents much of what makes sci-fi from this era so special. Arthur C Clarke takes a thoughtful stance on a serious issue, the progress of mankind, and that, striving ever upwards, with its roots firmly in the camps of Darwin and Nietzsche, is what makes us human. Clarke's novel is, to borrow a Heinlein term, pure speculative fiction, and he draws extensively on the very best science available to him. It is remarkable that this novel predates the moon landing, parts of it that already existed as short stories, by as much as 18 years. The basic framework that Clarke builds to contemplate the issue is mostly a strong story backed by decent prose that, despite some problems in pacing and structure, certainly by modern standards, remains entertaining and is occasionally outstanding. The Hal section holds up extremely well and is an extraordinary piece of sci-fi that is well worth the money on its own, while it is perhaps unsurprising that the rest of the text fails to reach the same high standards. It will probably surprise even less people that Clarke's novel stands up very well against the other sci-fi heavyweights of this era, Bradbury, Heinlein and Asimov. in the unlikely event of you being familiar with their work but not with this, then I definitely recommend checking it out. There's a lot to recommend here for sci-fi fans, and perhaps even a fresh perspective from people who've just seen the movie. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.